Back when I first began writing this script 4 years ago, I opened it by asking the viewer how fiction creates horror. Awkwardly shuffling around the bottom line for the purpose of sticking in a Resident Evil 4 joke, the point I was struggling to get to was that it's generally a fine balance between presenting the audience with a spine-chilling world, one often however not necessarily different from ours, while keeping itself tethered to reality. Reality not in the sense of groundedness, but more so believability. That in the presented world, under the given circumstances, this is a story that really could and would transpire. That way, the audience only has to suspend their disbelief for the fantasy of it all, and not have to intentionally blind themselves to the work's lapses in order to feel the way its authors meant them to. That preface will, for the remainder of this video, serve as the metaphorical bat with which I will be beating the living daylights out of Outlast. If you aren't even tangentially familiar with Outlast Legacy, its two sequels and comics, I'm going to assume you're either barely bred or nearly dead. Some 10 years ago, it swept YouTube with an all-consuming tide of clickbait thumbnails, and with them came what can only be described as a cunning scheme to trick your grandmothers into believing that this was in fact the scariest game ever made.
Gran, are you ready?
Yeah, you gonna help me?
Are you scared?
Oh,
The original was authored by a small team of 10, leads of which were ex-Ubisoft developers who previously worked on Assassin's Creed and Prince of Persia. The game took off straight into the stratosphere, making a whopping 15 million sales by 2018, and it spawned about the same amount of crappy, off-brand indie games that tried capitalizing off of its formula, a trend that keeps plaguing the horror scene to this day. You are Miles Upshur, an investigative reporter whose ambition is about to earn him an intimate tour of hell on Earth. Always willing to risk digging into the stories no other journalist would dare investigate, you will seek out a dark secret at the heart of Mount Massive Asylum. This I was quoting verbatim from the game's introductory text screen, which reads less like an opener and more so a marketing pitch or something you'd see on a box cover of a PlayStation 2 game. The text is immediately followed by an unskippable cutscene, in which Miles slowly drives his car up to the asylum. The only notable thing happening in this scene is a radio report about cattle behaving abnormally, and some bug infestations. If, like me, you didn't know any better, you'd assume the report had some relevance over the main narrative. You'd also question why anything from the text earlier wasn't instead told to you through the cutscene, you know, the way audiovisual mediums tend to generally be good at. But that would beseech this opener with a dose of substance that the people in charge seem tragically allergic to.
So what can you tell us about the game?
Well, Outlast is a survival horror game, going back to the roots, so there's no combat in the game. It's all about running and hiding, basically a stealth game in a horror context, and our goal is to scare the shit out of players.
Outlast seems to be all about the classics, those games without combat where your only defense against adversaries are your legs and the shift key. Those keener-eyed of you may have even found this opening scene to be a tiny nod to the one from Silent Hill. The main difference, of course, being that while Silent Hill uses it as not only a lovely piece of spectacle that sets the mood for the rest of the game, but also sort of inciting incident, Outlast is just kind of fancy with it. And as soon as the sequence ends, the player finds Miles reading the aforementioned tip-off in the form of a printed out email. Yes, reading again. This happens a lot in Outlast, as we're all taught, there seldom are things scarier than sitting down near dead Gotham citizens to catch up on all the printed out confidential emails these spooks keep scattering around like grade school homework. You get out of the car, stroll around, parkour your way up to the asylum, we'll come back to that shortly, get jump scared by the TV, get jump scared a little more, but this time by a dead man and a gust of wind in a windowless room. Get told by a suspiciously alive-sounding man to get out immediately.
They killed us. It got out. The berries. You can't. You have to get the fuck out of this terrible place.
listen to him and try to get out, only to realize that the patients in this asylum are shockingly good at locking doors behind them. Then, sighing, you, the player, proceed deeper into the facility, only to be jump-scared again by the tenderest lover of this game's mother. Those of you who went to college may have astutely observed that this is a lethal amount of screaming 3D models for what is in practice the first 10 goddamned minutes of the game. Outlast was already infamous for its overabundant use of the low-bar art of subpar jump scares, but I'm gonna say something that will make a few of your snobbish forehead veins pop. Jump scares are not exclusively bad. They're a tool like any other, and they have their applications and can lead to great results if used correctly. And it pains me to say that Outlast does not use them correctly. If you feel cheated right now, congratulations, you're a step ahead in critical thinking. Jump scares thrive with tension and relief. They're the snap of a rubber band stretched over your wrist, or the gunfire sounding at last at the end of a long stare down. Or as one Hitchcock once said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. Jump scares operate on the same basis as the bomb theory. They're not the total sum of suspense, but Outlast seems to be treating them as such. Imagine once more that instead of the rubber band stretching farther and farther away from you, leaving it up in the air when it will recoil back into your wrist, it were instead let go in constant short intervals. That's not painful, that's not suspenseful, that's not even scary. All that will achieve is annoy and desensitize you. Outlast's jump scares just do not stick at the landing. In fact, they don't stick at all. They're too frequent and identical to ever truly terrify you. It feels like the game actively works miracles to make sure that anything that would have been traditionally teeth-clenchingly horrifying just ends up being either annoying or so painfully forgettable that it might as well not have been there to begin with. To cleanse your palate a little, here's something that does not feel like showering in hand-me-down kitty litter instead. Credit where it's due, the game has plenty of adrenaline-inducing chase sequences and they generally feel pretty intense. The devs once described Outlast as a stealth game in a horror theme, and those bits end up being both the scariest and the most boring that the game has to offer. But in ways I cannot articulate well beyond personal preference. I just feel like the enemies are simultaneously too predictable and not predictable enough. I still haven't figured out what gives away my hiding position to them, and if and when you do hide successfully, because of the corridorial nature of the level design, whenever enemies leave you, you still have to stay hidden for a good while until they get far enough away from you for you to run back to your errands, most of which generally include interacting with several switches or gathering the key objects while avoiding the big baddies. It also doesn't help that the I in these enemies' AIs is silent. Remember when I said that the game was helmed by ex-Assassin's Creed devs? Well, that actually translates really well into the stealth sections of the game. Most notably for me, the sound design. They absolutely nailed it. Enemies bark whenever they're off your trail. Same as guards do in Assassin's Creed.
To hell with this. I've better things to do.
And the biggest bad of the game, Chris Walker, the piggy boy from earlier, makes a rattling metal sound as he moves. Just such a cool way of telling you you're not alone without screaming it at you that I just cannot help but commend it. While I'm being nice to the game, I also want to point out how great it looks. Keep in mind we're dealing with something made by 10 people almost 11 years ago. Unless you're running face first into the walls, the more lit locations of the game look almost photorealistic. They're gritty and natural in a way a lot of the games I've played fail to nail down. You can clearly tell that Outlast, despite everything I said and am about to say, is a labor of love, and it keeps feeling like it until the sour end. Regardless of how misguided I feel that love was, I would be a dishonest ass not to mention it at least once. It is the spit and the duct tape holding the rest of this product together. And the Concorder Night Vision gives it all a very distinct visual identity. Even if you've never played Outlast, someone could just show you a screenshot of it, ask you what it was, and I'm betting you'd guess correctly. A bit about the music. While I feel the direction is, again, misguided and generic, scary orchestral violins, I've never seen that before! The execution is far from the same. Much like the visuals, they're distinct and recognizable, and most importantly, they feel in place. They belong in the game. The textures are all fantastic. The tense pieces really get you riled up. And the slower ones instill a deep horror. And they all feel incredibly cinematic. To segue back to jump scares while I'm in a good mood, I want to add that not even all the ones in the game are bad. Few will hit you without being self-important about it. Even less, and the tension skyrocketing. And one anecdotal one in particular ended up being my favorite in the game. My issues with Outlast don't stem with it being a bad product, period. It is not a bad product. They stem from it, at its best, being a subpar and habitually immersion-breaking horror experience. The game feels like it's using the excuse of being a game far too often. It regularly prohibits you from revisiting old locations, and it never properly justifies why Miles cannot just up and crawl over a fence or kick some door open. Is he stupid? Well, not exceptionally, at least not by the standards set by Outlast's story, but I refuse to get into the game's narrative, since my biggest problem with it is wishing my grandmother had wheels so that she could have been a bike. Sure, most of the characters are decently memorable, but I cannot stop thinking about how, despite it being set in a psychiatric facility, Outlast has practically nothing to offer in terms of actual psychological horror. It's always either just gore, chases, or loud sound effects, or a combination of the three. This game could have been Shutter Island, but instead it opted into the life of Scooby-Doo, and that's all I can bring myself to say. Outlast frequently feels like an afterthought. The movement resembles dumbed-down Mirror's Edge. You ledge grab, take long leaps, and generally Miles' agility just seems off the charts. Which makes it even stupider that there's so many places it looks like he could get to but cannot, because the game decided so. Suspension of disbelief is by far Outlast's worst suit. No self-respecting horror game should ever allow you to bunny hop away from enemies. Outlast also tries to sell you the idea that when Miles realizes he's dug his own grave, it is too late to escape.
asylum, you get there, and when you realize it's really bad idea, it's already too late, you're stuck inside. So you're going to try to find your way out, and at the same time, you're going to discover what sort of experiments they've been doing to the patients, and who's behind those experiments.
However, it is only late because a jackass NPC was scripted to lock the door behind him. I have chewed ice with less force than this game applies to its mental gymnastics. Whose bloodied hand reached way over there to paint words doesn't matter. How do enemies keep appearing behind you at the most conveniently inconvenient times? Don't care. Who keeps scattering those batteries all over the place? No, seriously, who the hell thought batteries were a good idea? I get that the game is pretending to be survival horror and that there had to be resource management of some kind. But the setting being what it is, a healthcare facility, didn't they think that maybe health being a limited resource would have been a better idea than visibility? Imagine for a second again that instead of being threatened with a dimmer screen, if you mismanaged your resources, you'd instead have the looming fear of a game over your head. That would not only immediately make the game more immersive by the virtue of removing the Call of Duty tier health regeneration, but it will also make finding each one feel like a blessing. Instead, after finding a battery, all I can manage to feel is annoyance and disappointment. I feel sad about this game. It could have been just so much more. It had the potential, it had the right people, but it just somehow missed the mark for me. It doesn't carry the classical spirit that it was meant to. It blunts itself less than 20 minutes in, and it makes a complete misfire one of the best settings a horror game could possibly have. And yet, somehow, it did perfectly well commercially. People still love Outlast and praise it as a standout title. Probably helped create 1,000 nightmares, and it most certainly earned its makers a fortune. Don't get me wrong, I am happy for Outlast. I just wish I could also be happy with it. In conclusion, I do not think this game is bad. At least I do not think the game is bad in the same way I thought all those years ago. But I feel like it had the potential to be just a lot more. Could have been a standout not just of its genre but of its medium. A truly fine video game where the narrative and the gameplay go hand in hand, deliver you to the deepest pits of the enigmatic hell that is a person's mind. But instead it actively chose not to be any of that. And it depresses me to no end that a game with such vast potential only rounded down to a couple of green and black stains on the medium's history. Thank you for listening.